with something, right? With some potential pathogen. But you're not necessarily sick from that pathogen. Now, on the road to disease, on the course of disease, is infection. This is where a microbe will invade and grow in the body. Right? That's called infection. Okay? And if that infection spreads enough, it can develop into a disease where you have a disturbance in your normal body function. So your health is affected. There's a technical term that we're going to see later on. This is also referred to as morbidity. Okay, so if you see a statistic about morbidity, that means the number of people who have that particular disease. Okay? If they were to die from that disease, what's that called? So if someone dies from the disease, what term do we use instead? Sounds like morbidity, but it's different. Mortality, yes, mortality, right? So you often hear the terms paired, morbidity and mortality statistics. Right? Those refer to those two different aspects of disease, those who get it and those who die from it. And we'll see that come up later on. What causes the disease? That's the pathogen. Okay, so you're going to see that term used a lot. So we're going to study a lot of pathogens. And also the properties of the pathogen that promote disease, that's referred to as virulence. Right? So a pathogen is extremely virulent. Right? We'll mention one later on today. And if a pathogen is extremely virulent, people will easily die from it or get very, very ill from it. Okay? That's what this refers to, that it has properties that make it cause severe disease. All right, any questions about this? Okay, some other terms that you describe the condition of disease. And we'll see these come up in different contexts. There's symptoms and signs. Signs are what you can observe in someone else who has a disease. Right? So things like temperature, right? Body temperature. Okay, that would be a sign. Right? Symptom refers to what you feel if you have the disease. So if you feel malaise, or you feel tired, okay, that would be a symptom. So it might not necessarily, a third party might not necessarily, or someone else might not be able to measure that, how tired you are, or how much pain you feel, okay? That's a symptom, right? So sometimes physicians or nurses will try to get a sense of, or try to get a measurement by saying, okay, on a number from 1 to 10, how much pain do you feel, okay? All right, so but that's a symptom. If you have a group of symptoms and signs that in a disease, that's called a syndrome. All right, so we'll be looking at a whole collection of symptoms. Okay? These often affect can affect more than one part of your body. All right, that's a syndrome. So as an example, there's a disease which is called HPS. All right, S stands for syndrome. H stands for hantavirus. P stands for pulmonary. Okay. All right. So there's a, and I think later on today I'm going to try to show you this video which talks about this disease. There's a syndrome called hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Does anybody know why hantavirus is of interest around here, or why it's significant around here? Yeah, right. So last summer, there was an area that was affected by hantavirus, which was where? Yosemite. Okay. All right. So this is one outcome of that. You can get hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. But it's pulmonary. What part of your body is affected? Your lungs. Okay. So often patients can go into respiratory distress in later stages of the disease. Severe respiratory distress. Okay. All right. So Does anybody know where this appeared earlier in the United States? This is what raised the fears of Yosemite, especially. Okay, so yeah, Four Corners, exactly, right? So in the Four Corners area of the United States, in the 90s, there was a larger outbreak of hantavirus that killed several hundred people, I believe, okay, in the southwestern United States. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so that's a syndrome. And on the other end, you can have diseases that are asymptomatic or subclinical. Okay, so these refer to disease cases, individuals who are infected. They can transmit the disease, but they themselves may have very few, if any, symptoms. Okay, so as an example, there are some sexually transmitted diseases that have this kind of way of spreading. Right, so people infected don't show obvious symptoms or signs of disease, but they can easily transmit the disease through sexual contact. Okay? And that's how those outbreaks can often occur. Any questions about this? All right, so now we're going to start talking about something that we had in the very first unit, okay? But you may not remember what it was. It refers to a microbiologist, scientist named Robert Koch. He developed a set of postulates to to analyze how microbes cause disease, or to connect a microbe with a particular disease. And let's check this off, make sure I got everything here. All right, so the term that he used, or the field of study that he started with his postulates, so we're going to go over that, it's called etiology. Okay? Etiology. This is the study of the cause of disease. So when you see this term for the etiology of disease, what they're interested in is what causes that disease. Okay? So you can find this issue coming up if someone, let's say a patient arrives who has these signs and symptoms, and you're trying to figure out what is making that patient sick. Okay, you're delving into the etiology of that disease, what's causing it. So Koch's big connection is that when we look at diseases, right, you can trace that back to the microbes that cause the disease. So historically, people often didn't know what caused the disease, and they would associate it with, let's say, non-living parameters or properties. Like maybe the air was bad, okay, or maybe there was something in the air, something non-living in the water, some evil spirit. Okay, but here Koch made the connection between particular microorganisms and particular diseases. He developed a set of rules to try to establish this. Okay, there's 4 of them. All right, so if you want to show that a particular pathogen caused a particular disease, you have to go through these rules. So first of all, you have to be able to find the pathogen in every case of disease. You have to be able to isolate it and grow in pure culture. Okay? So this should be familiar to you since you just went through a lab doing this. Right? That all came from Robert Koch. The techniques that we used came from his work with this second rule. Okay? Then what you do is once you have a pure culture, if you introduce that culture, if you infect healthy subjects with that pathogen, it should cause the same disease. Right? And you should be able to isolate that pathogen from that individual. So if we look at this more pictorially, this is what we get. So here is the first rule. Right? Or let's say you have all these disease subjects. You should be able to find that microbe in all those disease subjects. Okay? You should be able to isolate that microbe and grow that in pure culture. Now remember, this is not as easy as it seems. Most of the microbes in nature we can't grow. Okay? So we actually can't do this. Right, with many microbes found in nature. this is what you can do in Koch's postulates. Then you reinfect other animals, other subjects, with that same pathogen, that purified pathogen. Okay? And if that pathogen really does cause a disease, they should get the same illness. Right? If they get the same illness from that pathogen, you should be able to isolate that pathogen, that same pathogen, from that disease case. Okay, so those are the 4 rules. All right? Any questions about that? All right, so this was developed in the 1800s, but this is a set of rules that we still follow today. It's like the gold standard for showing that a particular pathogen, a particular microbe causes a particular disease. All right, any questions about this? All right, so those are pretty rigid rules. So there are exceptions where we can't apply Koch's postulates. And so let me just give you some of the limitations, or some of the barriers that we run into. One is, as I mentioned, the pathogens that you can't culture in the laboratory. An example of this is Mycobacterium leprae. Right? What does this cause? Yeah, leprosy, right? So we can't grow this on a petri dish like you can grow your microbes, okay? All right, so that's one problem. Also, there are some diseases that are caused by a combination of pathogens. All right? What that means is that in order to get sick, you need to have more than one pathogen infect you. Okay? There are some cases where pathogens work together to produce disease. Okay? Often when people die from, let's say, influenza, right? It's not just influenza that kills them, it's influenza plus some other secondary infections that they get. Right? So although you may have all these people dying and they had influenza, it could be a combination of other factors, other pathogens that come into play. Also, you can have diseases like pneumonia, meningitis, right? But those diseases can be caused by more than one pathogen. Right? So it might be possible that this one pneumonia case was caused by one pathogen, another pneumonia case was caused by a different pathogen. Okay? The same is true for meningitis.